Okay, so next up, let's listen to what Scotty Cowling, WA2 DFI, the title of his talk is Tangerine SDR, a modular SDR for HamSCI, satellite, experimenters, and academics.
Thanks, Steve, and welcome to DCC. Glad to be here again. And we got to start off with the traditional quiz for you guys. And those of you who've been here before will already know this, but I did notice that about half of the people, this is their first DCC. Should you raise your hands again if this is your first time? Oh, wow, okay, fresh meat. Okay, so everybody knows what a Raspberry Pi is, right? Anybody not know what a Raspberry Pi is? You said yes, that doesn't make sense. I don't know either. You don't know either? Okay, well, you're about to find out. So you can't participate in this if you don't know what one is. But the question is, how do you work the remote? How many do you own? Okay, now we're going to raise the bar now. We're going to start with 20. 3 to own, okay, 25. Oh, come on. Okay, Albuquerque wins. There was a 25 guy there. How about 24? 23? 20, who, did somebody say 25? Okay, well now you got to subtract the ones off that are still in the box. They don't count. Okay, so you have 25 out of the box plugged in with power or doing something? 20-ish. Okay, now we're going to raise the bar here and say, how about any single board computer? Yeah, now, so Odroids count, any Raspberry Pi. Okay, so 25? Pardon me? Arduinos count, yes. Oh, this is going to be good. So how about 30? 40? Anybody got 40? Well, that's the right answer, because a radio guy never knows how many radios he has, right? And if your wife asks, there's only one answer that is right. That's right, okay. Can you strike that out, Jason? Okay, so I guess there's probably everybody now knows about HamSCI, so this slide is kind of irrelevant. So we'll jump right in here, and we started off with the most important thing that you have to have for a project is a name. Otherwise, you will fight forever. It'll be the new TAPR project until it's old, and then it'll still be the new TAPR project. So we had to come up with a name, and I started out with Orangesicle, but that is remarkably like Popsicle, and Popsicle defends their trademarks religiously. So if you're bored someday, which I'm sure all of you are bored, right? Go to the Popsicle website and look up the proper usage for all of their terms. They will be happy to tell you ad infinitum, page after page, of the proper use. It's not an orange sickle, it is an orange dreamsicle. So now you all have to use that right, otherwise you're going to get in trouble with Popsicle. Anyway, so I thought, well, maybe a better name would be a fruit, because look at all these other radios that are named after fruits. So we came up with Tangerine. You can't trademark Tangerine, so we're safe, I think. And we can get solder mask in orange. So we're set. So now all the important stuff's done. I'm done. That's my presentation. Thank you very much. Oh, wait. Okay, so what is it? And Nathaniel gave you a rundown of what the personal space weather station is. Tangerine is not a personal space weather station. Tangerine is one way to make yourself a personal space weather station out of hardware that you can buy somewhere. Hopefully you'll be able to buy it somewhere when we get done building it. So it's a modular, open source hardware and software platform for development of all components of SDR. How many people know what OpenHPSDR was? And I'll get in trouble for saying was there, but it's pretty much kind of tapered off. So about half of people know what it is. So it's similar to that, but we'd like to fix the deficiencies that OpenHPSDR had. And it's similar to OpenHPSDR, although now that Nathaniel has an NSF grant to do this, And I believe there's more people involved in this than were involved in OpenHPSDR. OpenHPSDR evolved down to maybe 3 or 4 people that did all the work, which is hard because they get burned out or they find other hobbies or other interests, and then you run into trouble. But when you have a large group, people can come and go. They get busy at work. They can't contribute enough, and they get replaced by someone else, and then they may come back when they get more time. So like I say, it's kind of like all these organizations, but it's different. It's the same, only different. It was supposed to be a joke. Okay, so the following features, and you might say, well, why did you give me a cost range like that wide? Well, because it's going to be that wide, because it's modular. So you can pick the features that you want, and if you don't want a $300 GPSDO to operate your radio, then you don't need to have one. But if you do need one, then you'll come here and get one. And it's going to be open source, hardware and software, and extremely modular, and if we do it right, advance the state of the radio art, because we're going to basically refresh all of the designs in the past with new parts, lower power, smaller dies, cheaper, hopefully, more performant. So I'm not going to dwell too long on this because you may have seen this already, but most of these things are obvious, that the lower the cost, the more users. And remember, HPSDR, it was kind of like the board of the month club, but it was more like board of the 6-month club because we weren't very fast. But the idea was it can shell out a couple $100 and I can buy this board, and then 6 months from now I can shell out another couple $100 and add functionality. By the time you were done, you had a $1,500 radio. But how many would have agreed to spend $1,500 the first day and get the whole thing? A few. Come see me afterwards. I need some investment. But the idea is, you see, we can build on something block at a time. And again, this is obvious too, more capability, higher cost, so you got to have a good trade-off. And the modularity helps here because if you need something that's higher performance, then you pay for it, but if you don't need it, you don't pay for it. When that relates back to the lower cost, more users. And because there's tiers of users. There's going to be the power user who wants the very best, highest performance, and then there's the more casual user. And so let me ask you this, how many have an RTL SDR dongle? Yeah, see, how many don't have one? Okay, well, you better get one because they're only $20. But the point is, it's $20. You don't even have to think about it. It's like 2 Big Macs is $20, so just go buy one. And it's healthier than a Big Mac, too. So, and then the modularity allows it to be adaptable to different applications, and it allows it to be more expandable and future-proof, but only to a point, because it's like, I have George Washington's axe. It says 3 new handles and 2 new heads, but it's still George Washington's axe, right? So it comes to a point where you can't really consider it the same piece. So just as a cost point, TNC2 was $179 in 1985, which is about $420 today. So I don't know about you, but I still think more about $420 today than I did about $179 in '85. But still, it's like we can't expect you to just walk out and spend $2,000 without thinking about it. But when it's a few hundred, maybe you don't think quite as hard. Okay, and we've already gone over this. And this is just expanding upon each one of the goals I had before, and this is the summary. And this, to me, is the most important one, because that shows that we're alive and active and doing things, and as evidenced by all of you here, you all get it, but let's have the next DCC have 50% more people because they all heard about this and are excited about something new. And it makes the hardware cheaper because we build more of them. Okay, so one of the ways we make it larger, we build larger volumes, is we have multiple target applications. So you heard about the Personal Space Weather Station, that's one. We should be able to adapt this with changing out 1 or more modules to be a Phase 4 satellite ground station. You can use it for academic uses, especially if you buy the low-cost version. You don't necessarily need performance. You want to teach students how FPGAs work and how SDRs work with FPGAs. You could use it for a radio, oddly enough, radio, who would have thought that that's what you'd use it for? And experimenters, if you want to figure out how the insides of your SDR work, you can buy something relatively low cost and you can experiment with it. And it's set up for remote radio because it's networked, and we use Ethernet for networking. And at ARRL this past Hamvention, I was talking to Ed Hare, and he got kind of excited because he wants an RF noise sniffer that's inexpensive and can be handheld. And he told me, well, the power companies have those. They cost $50,000. So if you can make one for $600, so then again, more volume. So some examples, personal space weather station. This chart might look a little familiar, but you need a GPS DO because you got to get very accurate time stamping of the samples that you're going to take. A dual channel receive. So dual channel receiver, this will be an HF receiver, so we're sampling 122 megahertz. So you get up to 60 megahertz of receive, 100 kilohertz to 60 megahertz basically. And then a magnetometer to measure the Earth's magnetic field, and the client computer to interface to the rest of the world. So part of the things that is important in this first slide of the architecture is this right up here. It's a dual gigabit Ethernet port. So what I've done is I basically said that the radio now is the box, a dotted box around both of these. Includes the single board computer. Because people come up to me and say, well, why don't you take the FPGA and make it an SoC FPGA and put a dual core ARM processor on it, and then you got the computer and you got the FPGA all on one board and you're all set. I go, well, that's great, but adding the SoC to that part cost over $100. How many of you paid $100 for your Raspberry Pi? Whew, I'm glad nobody raised their hand. But the point is, and if I make it a remote computer, then next week when Raspberry Pi 5 comes out, I can go buy one of those and I get more performance, and the price may go up a little, or it may not. So keeping the computer separate but connected is part of what this does. This is a 3-port gigabit Ethernet switch. One port goes to the FPGA, the other ports go one to the Ethernet, one to the client computer. So you don't have to have an external switch. 2 ports right on the board. You just plug the whole system together. So those are the 2 key things. And combine it with the computer and allow the connectivity without any additional hardware. Okay, so phase 4 ground system, what you would do is you would use an LNB that you can buy from China for $12 to convert your 10 gig down to 900 megs, filter the 900 megs in the receiver, band limit it, and then undersample it. And now you've got a 10 gig receiver. Transmitter's a little harder, but you basically send baseband up to the dish at the feed point, and I'm guessing you'll upconvert and power amp at the feed point of the dish. But the point is, I may not know exactly how all of this works, but I have the capability to make a system like this without going and redoing a whole bunch of boards. Amateur HF experimenter. Okay, so maybe you use a more premium receiver and transmitter and a premium oscillator, but not a GPS DO. You don't need that accuracy. So this might be a $15 oscillator instead of a $100 oscillator. So you see the modularity works in our favor here. You can kind of tune this to whatever level of performance you want. And then if you decide later, oh, gee, I want to get on the satellite, then you can buy the additional components and reconfigure it, and you've got a satellite ground station. Oops. So low-cost remote radio, maybe we'll make, how about you want to get on the VLF band? We got new allocations at like 136 kilohertz and 472 kilohertz. Well, that's really easy for an SDR. So you make a nice cheap board that plugs into the data engine, and now you've got an inexpensive SDR that covers those frequency bands for experimenters. And again, another premium performance. And again, you can do different levels. This one here, and you notice that this is yellow. So we have a kind of a tentative plan in the back of my mind for a bigger, more powerful data engine for those who want to do more powerful operations. But this is going to cost a lot more, so we're not going to do this out the gate. We're going to do the inexpensive one first. So, all that said, what does that mean? What are we going to build? And now that it's like Arlo Guthrie said, well, that's not what I came to talk to you about after halfway through. So, my aphorisms here. So now we're going to do details. How much time do I have? 20 minutes? It is what it is. Okay. So the details are here at the beginning of the details. So this is basically what the data engine is going to be. I call it a data engine because it has all of the logic compute power of the FPGA on board, and it has all of the communications interfaces. So we have high-speed interfaces to the RF modules, and this is one of the things that the HPSDR did not have. They had a narrow, unterminated parallel bus to connect all the boards together. Well, that ran out of bandwidth real fast. This is more of a star architecture because each one of these has its own path to the FPGA, and these paths are rated at like 5 gigabits per second. And they're made up of multiple 16-bit lanes of differential lines. So we've got a huge data path here from the RF into the FPGA. Then we have a clock module up here, and you buy the clock module for whatever level of performance you need. And then down here, and I haven't found another SDR that does this, we provide gigabit Ethernet and USB 3, 5 gigabit channels. It's a one-lane full duplex, 5 gigabits on the USB 3. And the Space Weather Station really doesn't even use this interface. So I'm sure we'll find a use for it somewhere. And then the connection over to the single board computer, and these are more high performance versions and more cheaper versions, so you get to pick what you want. Undoubtedly what we'll do is we'll pick two maybe. We'll pick a Raspberry Pi 4 because of the widespread support, and then we'll pick one higher performing one like an Odroid or a Vim or something like that, and we'll support those two. Okay, so this piece right here is kind of like the infrastructure that everybody needs, the compute power and the I/O, the gigabit switch and the USB 3. So what do you get here? This is the FPGA, and this is actually incorrect because that's a 256 pin part, and there's no way we're going to cram all this into 256 pins. It's going to be a 672 pin part. And you use this RAM here. This is local RAM for buffering. And this SPI flash memory can be used to hold multiple configurations. And again, these are future features, but these parts are so inexpensive and so useful that we put them on the board now for later use. And of course, you got to have a micro SD card. Also, there's probably going to be an update path through the micro SD card like there is through a Pi, for a Pi. 11 to 15 volt wide input. This is probably going to be more like 19 volt. The idea is you can plug it into a cigarette lighter. You can run it on your bench supply at home. Same thing that runs your ICOM, you can run this on. And I touched on 3-port gigabit E switch. We're going to have a cryptographic processor which can store RSA keys and also has a unique 72-bit serial number for every board. We're not quite sure what we're going to do with 72 bits of unique serial number, but this is the same part that the Lime guys use, and it costs like 80 cents. So the unique serial number is worth 80 cents right there.
On every module, not just every.
On every module. So every RF module, every clock module, every DE, we're going to be able to identify what it is. Okay? It looks like I put the wrong slide in here. Okay, this is kind of another okay, so this is the one that I showed you before. This is another representation of just the module with the gigabit Ethernet switch or port, USB 3, clock module, and here's the 3 RF modules down here. The leaf board, you got to have catchy acronyms, right? I mean, there's HAT and there's SHIELD and there's CAPE and there's LEAF. And it stands for Low Speed Expansion Adapter Fixture. Now remember that, there'll be a quiz on that. But this is meant for low speed I/O. However, we've also enhanced it with high speed I/O so that we can actually build a leaf board that has Arduino SHIELD connectors, has a Raspberry Pi hat, it has a Ultra 96 board, high speed. That's a Xilinx SoC board that you can buy for about $150. We can build a leaf board with that connector, and you can expand the data engine with that kind of functionality. So we're trying to think of everything that we can think of ahead of time. Of course, we'll undoubtedly forget something, but we've already remembered way more than you can buy on any other board. So the communications, like I said, 5 gigabit per second, full duplex USB 3. We're also, in a stroke of genius, my business partner says, well, why don't you put a USB 2 host on there, and then they can all plug in their RTL dongles into this board. So now, and then you can argue, well, I can just plug my RTL dongle into a Raspberry Pi, so I don't need, well, okay, great. So can the Raspberry Pi do LDPC decoding at high speed? Probably not. So you're going to be able to do things with the dongle on this board that you can't do with your Raspberry Pi, because you're going to be able to utilize the high-speed processing of the FPGA, which does not exist on the Raspberry Pi. And then dual gigabit Ethernet RJ45 ports with the third port going back to the FPGA. And I have not figured out whether we're going to put this on here. The problem is all Wi-Fi modules that I can find that cost $2 are all for IoT applications, and their interfaces are serial ports that run at 9600 baud. Well, it's great for configuring things, but it's not good if you want to run IQ data at those low data rates. So we may just relegate that to an I/O board. Okay, so now the other piece we're going to look at here is the RF modules. We've got 3 of them that directly feed the FPGA, and this is where your antennas hook. So this is where you're going to get the data that the FPGA is going to process. So we started out with thinking, I naively thought I would use M.2 connectors, which are the same connectors SSDs use, the little bitty 75-pin guys. Well, we start adding up the number of pins we need to be able to do a transmitter and a receiver and a dual port receiver and a 4-channel receiver. It became clearly obvious that 75 pins was not going to be near enough. So we graduated to the 140-pin model, which is still not enough, but it's the biggest one we can put on there without making the board bigger. So we're going to make this work. So we have 2 identical ones, so you can put, if we make a dual channel RF module as our first RF module, you can use 2 of them, and then you have 4 channels, and they'll be coherent channels. So now you can beam steer. There's lots of opportunities that you can do with this by having 2 ports. And then in order to facilitate debug, if anybody here remember SDR stick? So anyways, boards that we made at Zephyr to pair with a B-Micro SDK from Arrow to build a radio. The problem is that Arrow discontinued the B-Micro SDK, so now I have a bunch of these RF boards with nobody to plug them into. Well, the connector for them is just gold fingers on an edge card. And so we're going to put one of those connectors on the board so that as soon as I get a data engine, I can plug one of these in and I have a radio. So now I can debug the data engine before I get an RF module. So it's pretty much for a debug. Steve, how much time do I have? Okay. Okay. So the first RF module out the gate is going to be for the personal space weather station, receive only, but again, it's going to be a dual channel HF direct sampling receiver module. It'll have lots of other applications besides just the personal space weather station. It'll be kind of like a dual channel Hermes to start with, and again, phase synchronous sampling of the 2 channels. And then I talked about the LNB and the filter board. Well, so the next one will likely be this 10 gigahertz receiver module that uses a cheap LNB from overseas. And these are RF systems on a chip, like the Lime. Everybody heard of the Lime Mini? Lime has a whole series of radios that use these 2 chips here. And Analog Devices has one that uses 9361. Unfortunately, these chips are pretty expensive, but they cover DC to daylight. The 9361 is 70 megahertz to 6 gigahertz. So I had, at Hamvention, I talked to the Society of Amateur Radio Astronomers and trying to get from them what would the requirements be for a receiver if you were to be able to dictate what you wanted. They said, well, we're looking for pulsars. So what we want is a receiver that covers 1 gigahertz to 1.2 gigahertz, 200 megahertz wide, and what we want is a 1-second report, an integration of all the energy in that 200 megahertz band. No SDR will do that today. No one that I know. I'm sure the super expensive ones will do it, but no amateur ones will do that. And in fact, none of these chips will do that, but they come close. This is like 56 megahertz simultaneous bandwidth. These are, I believe, 65 megahertz simultaneous bandwidth. So here's what you do then. On the RF module, you take 3 of those, and you concatenate the sampling windows, and now you get 190 megahertz of, and the data rate is ridiculously low. 1 energy report per second. I mean, you could do that at 110 baud on a serial port. So that's not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is integrating all of that RF in that 200 megahertz and getting the RF to the FPGA so it has access to the samples to do the integration. So interesting to see different applications of the same hardware that are so totally different, and yet we have to be able to accommodate them. Okay, so the RX module, this is the one for the personal space weather station, the first one we're going to do. And Tom's been working on this, and this is just the preliminary stuff from about 6 months ago. We may not use this ADC, but it's the general idea of a dual 14-bit, and I don't know if we've decided whether it might be better to use 2 singles because you get better signal-to-noise ratio, but this is a design trade-off. There'll either be 2 chains or there'll be a single chain in 2 merged chains with 1 dual ADC. Then a step attenuator on the front end, and for you HPSDR folks, this looks awful familiar. Some kind of amplifier, low-pass filter, and one of the optional things we're going to have is a header that you can plug on an optional filter. So if you don't like the filter we give you, you just take that off, and then you have a plug-in board, and you can build any kind of filter you want. Little next door to CKLW, put yourself a bandpass filter, a notch for that frequency, or a low pass or a high pass, whatever you need. And another thing that the personal space weather station guys wanted was a way to calibrate with an onboard noise source, which is harder than it seems, but we're going to have that feature. Okay, so this is kind of an eye chart, but this is sort of what we're expecting. Antennas over here, so you got the noise source, switchable noise source, filters, programmable attenuators, amplifiers, and then the ADCs and the data out to the FPGA. And this is the 140-pin connector right here that I described before. Okay, I'll leave that there for just a second to sink in. I don't want to go too fast. So now the clock module. And this is probably the least developed and the most important module that we have, because if you've got a bad clock, you got a bad radio. So it's very important. So the idea is that if you want a basic radio, you don't buy a clock module. You got an onboard oscillator and you use that. And we pick a reasonably good one, but it's not an 80-cent CPU oscillator, but it's not a $50 VCXO either. So you're going to get reasonable performance, but it's also very low cost, and you don't have to have a clock module if you just want basic performance. But then if you want more, we use an M.2 connector, and the reason I picked these is they're high speed and they're cheap. They're under $1 for the connectors. So we may do any of these options. John Ackerman and I were talking about this at breakfast today, so we're going to hammer out what the options are going to be that are going to be available. And it's not trivial, because trying to integrate clocks from multiple sources is not easy. And I know Tom's trying to keep me in line, because I'm saying, oh, we'll just tie them together and then just tri-state one of the buffers. It's only 100 megahertz, right? And he says, no, the edges are over 1 gigahertz. So when even the 7 puff of a tri-state buffer paralleled onto your clock tree creates reflections and bad things, and you can't have bad things, so you have to do it a different way. So this is going to be a challenge to come up with the clock tree. How are we going to do this, and what different levels of clock oscillator are we going to have? So there's an example of a GPSDO. So you have a GPS here, and this is a jitter-reducing buffer with DSPLLs in it. So you'll be able to synthesize almost any frequency you want coming out to run the receivers. And this is an example of the CVD 950. This is the one that we use on Hermes. And the non-10s use this extensively because it's really low phase noise, and it's probably, you can't even really read it, but it gets down to below 160 dBc per hertz down out here at the bottom, at the far away in the far domain. And the performance of the receiver is really directly tied to the performance of whatever oscillator you use. Okay, so now I'll cover the leaf a little bit, and I'm going to kind of go through this quickly because we're not planning really to use the leaf. Okay, thanks. We're not really planning to use the leaf on the first iteration because it's an I/O expander, but we've done something kind of clever, I think, if I do say so modestly. We've rigged it so you can use a Raspberry Pi hat. So if you want to, I mean, how many Raspberry Pi hats are there? There's hundreds, thousands of them maybe. So we've made it so you can physically put a Raspberry Pi hat on, but then all you get is the low-speed I/O that the Raspberry Pi header has, up to maybe 4 megahertz of serial I/O. Well, if you need something a little bit more than that, like for instance the Ultra 96 board that has a Xilinx part on it, has high-speed LVDS lanes. If you want to put an adapter board, make a leaf board that has a socket for that board, well, you have to have high-speed I/O. Well, this connector on the Raspberry Pi doesn't have any high-speed I/O, so you can't do it. So what we did is we added a high-speed LVDS connector kind of off to the side, so our custom boards will have a little tab down here on the bottom, and I have a mock-up of the whole system if you want to take a look in the demo room, demonstration room later. But the idea is you can plug one of our boards in, and now you get high-speed I/O, and as I was thinking about this is the leaf board right here. I could make an SDR with no RF boards and just put the A to D on here. Now, it's not going to be high performance, it's not going to be 5-channel or anything. It'll be a basic board, but it might be the most inexpensive solution for the entry-level Tangerine. Okay? So you can see what we've done is the low-speed I/O down here, and we've added high-speed I/O. So we build a leaf board that takes both of these, and you can put an Arduino connector on there if you want to use an Arduino. So what do they call them? Shields or BeagleBoard capes, dog collar. Okay, so like I said, you get dual connectors for both low and high speed. And say you want to make a radio out of this. Well, where's my mic? Where's my PTT? Where's my paddle input? There are none of those. So you buy a very inexpensive low-speed I/O board, you put those connectors on there. So this is kind of what it looks like. The blue outline here is a hat. The orange outline is our board, which is a little bit bigger and plugs into this high-speed connector down here at the bottom. So low-speed I/O up here, high-speed I/O down here, so the leaf has both, and the hat only gets the low-speed I/O. And the low-speed I/O supports all of these interfaces, SPI, I2C, UART, I2S, and GPIO. So you can use it for any of those. And the high-speed I/O, you get 13 high-speed differential pairs, so that's what you connect to an ADC or whatever RF portion you're going to build onto the board. Again, it wasn't really designed to do that, but it will do it. So all of these down here, these modules, we can implement these on a leaf board. So, as the software guys say, you're crazy, because they're going to have to support all those. And I go, I don't care, you can plug them in, see? So now it must work, right? It's just software. So, smart aleck, right? They're going to run me out of town on the steam train. Okay, so this is basically the diagram of the mock-up, and you know what? This took a long time to make, but that took longer to make than this, to draw this up. So again, come see me in the demo room for a real look at this. It's much easier to understand than this. So this is the data engine board. This is the low-speed I/O for the leaf, the high-speed I/O for the leaf. The clock module sits right here. Here's your 3 RF modules. We stack the RJ45s to reduce the board circumference area that we need, and we put the USB-A vertical also. RF module becomes a tall thing that goes, it's the whole height of the DE on the back. And you can't put anything on the sides because there's two of them, and they can either go that way or that way, so you can't put any I/O on the sides. And you can't put the SMAs underneath here, so now just by default has to be that long. And if we extend the DE, it's going to have to be, these will have to be extended also. The clock module, this is the M2 connector here, and then a GPS antenna and a reference input, tentatively anyway. The leaf module, this is our module, so the high-speed connector down here, the low-speed connector up here. And there's a picture of all of them disassembled out of this stack here. And I say, this is almost done. I just need to put some ICs on it, right? And determine where not to put copper. Remove a little bit of copper, you know, that's up to the user to figure out where what. Yeah, that's right. So there's kind of a diagram of where everything is on the board. USB 2 for the RTL dongle here. This is PMOD. Now, I didn't touch on this much, but we're going to be able to handle the magnetometer. We needed one low-speed interface that we could use for the Space Weather Station, and I didn't want to have to require a leaf board for the Space Weather Station, so we put all of the basic needs on the data engine. And again, this is how the clock module mounts, and this is a PMOD example board, but we're going to use the PMOD interface to talk to the magnetometer that we've seen on earlier slides. Okay, so future boards, DE number 2, larger, faster FPGA, more storage on board, maybe an M.2, real M.2 connector for an SSD, or who knows where we're going to go with Ethernet. This is the beauty of it. Without much protocol change, you can go to 10 gig E or 40 gig E or optical or whatever, but the same RF boards will work on the new board. That's the idea, is to be compatible. The webpage, TangerineSDR.com. And say thanks to our webmaster, Dave, KV0S. He's doing a great job doing that, and it's a thankless job, and he volunteered to help, and then he just gets to do all of it. So we'll help him by giving him applause, right? And then our mailing list is here, TAPR list, and you can subscribe here. Again, if you go to TangerineSDR.org, all of this information is there. So that's really, this is the only URL you really have to remember. You're right, it is COM. I think. I don't know. Okay. If .com doesn't work, try .org. If that doesn't work, then consult the webmaster, right? If you can find him. Oops. It's .com, okay. TeamSpeak on Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. Everybody's welcome. If you're shy and you don't want to talk, come listen. We have interesting discussions pretty much every week. And again, thanks to Dave for setting that up. And Dave runs the TeamSpeak sessions pretty much every night, except the nights when he has these personal things that interfere, like family and stuff like that. I don't know what. Oh, yeah. Oh, and Mike, AAK, Mike records the TeamSpeak sessions every week and puts them up on the Tangerine SDR website. So if you're really bored some night, we have about 24 up there now, because we started back in one per week since we started. You can go listen to them. So it's very, very easy. He also participated on the OpenHPSDR. And yes, he's doing the same thing for us that he did for OpenHPSDR in the recording and the posting of the... He is, okay. There you go. Let's see, where am I? I am done. Thank you very much.
Any quick questions? Quick questions? Okay, right back here.
Yeah, just a quick question. What was your rationale for choosing Altera part and Max 10 specifically?
The rationale for choosing the Max 10 part was, number one, I have 30 years of experience doing doing Intel. Well, for those who don't know, Intel bought Altera. I still call them Altera because they're still Altera. So But anyway, I have lots of experience with Altera. We're a design services partner with Altera, so I get better support from Altera. And that part is the cheapest part per logic unit you can buy. And everybody says, oh, you should use a Xilinx part. You should use a Cyclone 5. Well, every time I try to change it, the price doubles. So I'm like, okay, we're just going to use this part, and we're going to stick with that. And I'm not going to preclude using Xilinx parts or any other programmable part later. But this is just the first one because it's the most familiar. So that's answer your question?
Okay, any other questions? All right, let's move
All right,
right
thank you.
along. Thank you, Scotty.